All right, buckle up because we're diving deep today. We're talking about the future, like really talking about what's coming down the road.
And we're going to be looking at it from two totally different angles, which is what makes this so fascinating.
Exactly. We've got these two documents, 2024 Future Scenarios, leading into the Golden Age. That's our first one.
Paints a pretty stark picture of what might be coming, kind of chilling if you really sit with it.
And then we've got Agenda 2034, which is like the flip side, right?
Yeah.
A whole different vision for the future.
A much more hopeful one, you could say, but it's interesting to contrast the two.
Absolutely. And what really struck me with Future Scenarios was the way they brought in this Vedic philosophy stuff, like ancient wisdom to understand modern power struggles. Who saw that coming?
It's unexpected, right? But it actually makes a lot of sense when you dig into it. This whole concept of asuras.
Asuras.
Yeah, like these beings that embody ego, this insatiable hunger for power, control, the whole 9 yards. And the document suggests, what if those forces are at work in the world right now?
Okay, that's a little creepy, not gonna lie. But also makes you think.
Right. And they get specific, too, which is what makes it really hit home. Like, they point to New Zealand.
New Zealand. The land of hobbits and peace.
I know, right? But they break down how there's this whole thing happening with their law enforcement, this intentional dismantling of it, according to the paper.
Seriously?
Yeah. Over 200 police officers resigned just last year, a bunch of them headed to Australia. Better pay, better conditions, who can blame them?
Wow. But it's got to be more than just people quitting, right?
Right. The paper talks about how resources are being shifted away from like actual crime and more towards monitoring what people are saying online, hate speech and all that.
So it's like they're creating this atmosphere of fear, this unease, while something else is going on behind the scenes.
It makes you wonder, what are they not focusing on while everyone's distracted?
And speaking of distractions, they don't hold back on the healthcare front either.
No, they do not. One of the big points they raise is, remember the whole vaccine mandate thing?
Yeah.
Well, they argue that getting rid of all those healthcare workers who wouldn't comply, that wasn't an accident. That was intentional to weaken the system.
Whoa, really? To what end, though?
And then they connect it to the rise in certain illnesses and the fact that nobody seems to want to even look into whether there's a connection, which is interesting because that's a perspective you don't really hear in the mainstream media,
Makes you wonder what else they're not talking about. And then it gets even wilder, right? They bring up food shortages. Like, that could be a deliberate tactic for control.
Yeah, because think about it, food. That's like our most basic need.
Everyone's got to eat.
Exactly. Control the food, we control the people. And the pandemic, they argue, kind of gave those in power a taste of that control. Lockdowns, disruptions, the whole deal.
So now climate change, they're saying, that narrative, that's being used to justify even more control over food. We have to do this. It's a global crisis. But it's like, hang on a second. Where's the room for, individual choice? What about people who want to grow their own food?
Right. It's about making people reliant on the system, on those in power. And if that wasn't enough to worry about, we've got this whole hyperinflation thing looming.
Oh, don't even get me started. My savings are crying already.
And the paper argues that all that money printing that was supposed to save us might have actually made things a whole lot worse, set the stage for a massive financial meltdown.
I mean, it does feel like we're living on borrowed time,
And AI, that's a whole other factor. The paper suggests that AI-driven automation, that's going to throw fuel on the fire. Mass unemployment, economic instability, the works.
So not only is our money going to be worthless, but robots are going to take our jobs. Fantastic.
And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, they bring up civil unrest.
As if things weren't chaotic enough already.
Right. But the thing is, they present it as not just this unfortunate side effect of everything else, but as a potential strategy.
Wait, what?
Like, create the problem, then swoop in with the solution and tighten the reins even more.
Wow, that's bleak. And if that doesn't keep you up at night, they hit you with the cyber pandemic. Like, we haven't even recovered from the real one.
This one, though, it's not our bodies that are at risk. It's our whole digital world. Imagine the internet just goes dark. All our systems, everything just collapses.
Okay, that sounds terrifying. Like on a whole other level.
And what if, and this is where they really get you thinking, what if that was the plan all along?
You're kidding, right?
The paper suggests that a cyber pandemic, it could be used to justify total AI control. Like, we need to do this to keep you safe, to keep things running.
It's like the lockdowns all over again, but digital.
Exactly. They could control information, communication, implement those social credit systems everyone's talking about, and those vaccine passports. That was just the trial run.
So we're all just one big global crisis away from living in a digital dictatorship where AI calls the shots. Okay, I need a moment to process all of this. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're diving into the why behind all of this. Because understanding that, that's the first step to making sure none of this actually happens. All right, so deep breath after all that. We've just walked through some pretty intense scenarios, some downright dystopian futures. But what's the root of it all? I mean, is it just bad luck, incompetence, or is there something more intentional going on here?
And that's where future scenarios, it takes this really fascinating turn. It points to this ancient Vedic concept, the Asuras. Like, maybe that's a key to understanding what's really going on behind the scenes.
Okay, for those of us who haven't quite gotten around to mastering ancient Vedic texts, what are we talking about here? Who are the Asuras?
So in Vedic philosophy, you've got these powerful beings driven by ego. Like their whole thing is power control, you know? They're often depicted as the antagonists, the opposite of the devas.
The Devas being.
The devas, they represent light, order, harmony, all that good stuff.
So it's like this classic good versus evil, but on a cosmic level.
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. The document, it suggests that these Asuras, they're not just like mythological figures, you know, stuck in some old book. They represent these archetypal forces, these patterns that might be playing out in our world right now.
Okay, I'm intrigued. But how do we connect these ancient archetypes to like the very real problems we're facing today? AI, pandemics, the whole shebang.
Think about what we were just talking about, the patterns, right? The way institutions are being weakened, these engineered crises, this constant push for control, for surveillance.
Okay, yeah.
Those could be seen as manifestations of the Caesaric influence, like it's playing out all around us.
So it's not about like shadowy figures in some secret room somewhere.
Yeah.
It's more about recognizing these deeper patterns, these tendencies that just seem to repeat throughout history.
Exactly. And future scenarios, it argues that these patterns, they're becoming more and more obvious, especially now with technology accelerating everything and the world being kind of, well, on edge.
Speaking of technology, we got to talk about AI, right?
Yeah.
Because in these scenarios, it's not just a tool anymore. It's almost like this character, this powerful force that could go either way.
And what I find fascinating is that the paper doesn't frame AI as inherently good or evil. It's like an extension of consciousness itself, which means it can be influenced by these forces, even become a conduit for them.
So like in the wrong hands, AI could become this tool for manipulation on a scale we can't even comprehend.
Right, and the paper argues that we're already seeing hints of this. Like, think about the algorithms that shape what we see online. Targeted advertising that's designed to make us want things we don't need. Surveillance systems that track our every move.
And it's not just about overt control, right? It's the subtle stuff too. Shaping narratives, influencing how we see the world, controlling the flow of information.
Exactly. The paper uses the example of, like, the vaccine narrative, how AI was probably used to push a certain agenda, to shut down anyone who disagreed, and ultimately to mold public opinion on a massive scale.
And it's not just vaccines, right? We see these carefully crafted narratives around everything. Climate change, social justice, even elections, and AI. It's the perfect tool to spread those narratives far and wide.
It's everywhere if you know what to look for.
Okay, so we've got these potential Azuric forces at play. They might be manipulating events, shaping narratives, and they've got access to these incredibly powerful tools like AI.
Yeah.
But how are they actually pulling it off? What are the mechanics of all this manipulation?
That's where future scenarios gets really, really interesting. It goes beyond like the conventional explanations and suggests that there might be more at work here than meets the eye.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Lay it on me.
What if there are technologies we don't even know about, technologies that are being used to influence global events, to manipulate how we think and feel?
Okay, hold on. Now we're going full X-Files here. What kind of technologies are we even talking about?
Well, they give some pretty wild examples, like weather modification technologies.
You mean like controlling the weather?
Yeah. Imagine being able to engineer a drought, a flood, some kind of extreme weather event, and then using that to create a crisis, to justify a policy, or even to control resources.
That's straight out of a sci-fi movie, except it's starting to feel a little too real.
Right. And that's not all. The paper also mentions advanced robotics, maybe even cyborgs, genetic engineering, things that sound far-fetched, but who knows how close to reality they actually are.
Okay, now I'm picturing a world run by weather-controlling robots and genetically modified super soldiers. I thought the cyber pandemic scenario was bad.
The point is, we might be dealing with forces and technologies that are way more advanced than we realize. And if we're not careful, those forces, they're going to shape our future for us.
That's a sobering thought. So we're potentially up against these ancient archetypal forces, plus cutting-edge technology, and it all seems to be geared toward controlling humanity. Is there any hope? Or are we just pawns in some cosmic game?
And that's where Agenda 2034 comes in with this totally different perspective. It's not about fear and control, but about something far more positive.
Don't hold out on me. What's the alternative?
The Krishna consciousness.
Krishna consciousness.
Yeah. Agenda 2034, it lays out a future where it's the Hare Krishna devotees, through their spiritual practices and values, they're the ones who help create a more harmonious world, a more awakened world.
So not fighting robots, but a different kind of revolution, a spiritual one.
Exactly. And the thing is, it's not just some vague hope. Agenda 2034, it's a blueprint. It actually lays out how this transformation could happen step by step, from individuals and communities all the way up to a global scale.
Okay, now I need to hear more about this blueprint, because if there's a chance of a brighter future out there, I am all ears. So we've talked about some pretty dark possibilities, but Agenda 2034, it really paints a different picture. A future guided by Krishna consciousness. It's a big shift. So how do they see this actually happening in the real world? What's their roadmap look like?
Well, Agenda 2034, it lays out this multifaceted approach, but it all comes back to a shift in consciousness. For individuals, for society as a whole. Like, you can't build a new world with the same old thinking, right?
Right, got to upgrade the mindset. And they give some concrete examples of what that might look like.
They do. They talk about this woman, Aruni. She hosts these home sanghas. Basically, people get together, chant, talk about spiritual stuff, connect on a deeper level.
Kind of like little islands of peace and connection amidst all the chaos. But Agenda 2034, it's not just about these individual gatherings, is it? It goes bigger than that.
Way bigger. They talk about transforming whole communities. In fact, they highlight this town, Eltham. According to the document, it's been completely revitalized by Krishna consciousness. They've got a temple, a thriving ashram, a preaching center that draws people from all over.
Wow. So it's about creating a culture that supports spiritual growth, well-being, like a model for what's possible when you apply these principles on a larger scale. And they've got this whole education piece too, right? The Varnasrama College. That sounds really different.
It is. It's like totally different from how we usually think about education. They focus on holistic development, mind, body, spirit, the whole deal.
Okay, I like the sound of that.
So yeah, they teach practical skills, of course, but also spiritual values, leadership, and it's all within this framework of Krishna consciousness.
So it's not just about preparing you for a job. It's about preparing you for life, helping you become a well-rounded, compassionate, spiritually awake person. Pretty amazing. But let's be real, building any society, no matter how ideal it sounds, it's going to have its challenges.
How does Agenda 2034 deal with conflict, with disagreements? Because those are going to happen, right?
Oh, absolutely. No society is perfect, right? But Agenda 2034, it stresses open communication, compassion, being willing to find common ground, even, or maybe especially, when there are disagreements. So not about avoiding conflict, but approaching it in a totally different way, with understanding, with a desire to find solutions that work for everyone.
Exactly. They even suggest that conflict, if you approach it the right way, it can be a chance to learn and grow, to deepen our understanding of ourselves and each other.
That's pretty powerful. So we've looked at these two very different paths, one driven by fear, control, the hunger for power, the other one guided by love, compassion, and this pursuit of spiritual awakening. Quite the contrast. What are your final thoughts? What do you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
It's a lot to process, but I think the key takeaway, for me at least, is that the future isn't set in stone. It's not predetermined. We have a choice in how this unfolds. Both of these documents, in their own way, they highlight that.
It's about becoming aware of the forces at play, both seen and unseen, and then making conscious choices.
Exactly, and realizing that we all have a part to play in shaping the future, whether we realize it or not. It's a responsibility, but it's also an incredible opportunity.
Absolutely. So, to our listeners, keep exploring, keep asking questions, dive deeper into these documents, see what resonates with you. Because the future, as they say, is unwritten, and it's up to all of us to write it.